entrance ditch, the Erie Canal, the Barge Canal, and now for our bicentennial year named the Grand Canal, right here in our own backyard. From Syracuse to the Hudson River, you can enjoy a feeling of the past from your own boat. Dense forests, cows drinking at the edge, Amtrak running along the side, wildflowers, birds, and best of all, the locks. Each lock different. You're being lifted up from here to Rome, then dropped down from Rome to the Hudson. Until they built the Eisenhower Lock, you will go through the then tallest lock in the world, a lift lock at Little Falls. Join me on a bicentennial weekend on the Erie Canal. The impact, of the Erie Canal was shown by the great westward expansion of the United States, which is credited to the canal and the establishment, believe it or not, of New York City as being the #1 port in the United States. The Erie Canal also helped establish many upstate cities, such as Syracuse, Rochester, and Buffalo, and cities even further west, including Cleveland and Chicago. Everybody thought Clinton was a little bit crazy, but Clinton showed them the ditch proved a success, and in fact it was the forerunner of the trains, and now the thruway, and even the planes that come to Syracuse. Here are the locks. You have to go through one to really believe what you're seeing. As I said earlier, when you're going towards Rome, you're being lifted up. Here's a young man making sure that his boat is good and secure, and here are the locks closing behind you. The lock will fill with water, and when it's reached the proper height, the gate at the other end opens, and out you come, and off you go again. Sometimes you can travel literally for miles, and no lock, and then there's one lock right on top of the other. There you saw a wonderful example of why the speed limit on the Erie Canal is 10 miles an hour. I asked who patrols the canal. They said nobody has to, because they know when you're due at the next lock. One of the things I learned too on being on the canal, and it was told to me by a boatman, if you don't have it aboard, you better learn to do without. And that's true. There's nothing along the canal except places to get gas. All right, we're coming now into Rome. Rome is a very strategic city, and in Rome we visited the beautifully restored Fort Stanwix, an absolute fabulous restoration. And here at Fort Stanwix was one of the crucial battles of the American Revolution. It's credited with the English losing the war, because the English were going to attack the Americans with 3 prongs. We're coming from Champlain, St. Leger, coming down the Mohawk, and Lord Howe supposedly up the Hudson. Well, the big battle was on August the 2nd, 1777, the siege of Fort Stanwix. Colonel Barry St. Leger attacking with 800 English and Hessian troops and 1,000 Indians. The fort defended by Lieutenant Colonel Peter Gansevoort with only 700 people, and including, believe it or not, 8 women. The soldiers were from the 3rd New York Battalion. The soldiers were from Albany and all of upstate New York. 20 days the battle raged, and as you can see there is Mill Creek, the water supplying the fort. Well, the English in 4 days cut the water off, but they dug wells. The siege was lifted by General Benedict Arnold on August the 22nd. The people that lived in this fort lived an awful life. The privates got $6.23, the corporals $8, the colonels, if you were a colonel or a little bit better, you might get $130 a month if you could collect it. Cribbage was the big game that the soldiers played. The barracks were primitive. The few women that were there did the darning the consoling, the letter writing, because most of these men couldn't write, and believe it or not, from what I learned, most of the women could. I guess the women had time to learn. It was long hours. The siege was brutal. There wasn't much to do but hope that the stockade will hold. They couldn't attack. They could just every so often let the English and the Indians on the outside know that they were there. And they did that with regularity. It wasn't until General Herkimer heard of the attack and started to move to try to relieve the fort that the Indians, and there were 1,000 of them, I said, were a little leery on the outside. They weren't quite sure what was happening. But that's another story, and we'll get to it when we get to Oriskany. The Stars and Stripes flew first here at Fort Stanwix in the year 1777. From the outside, it doesn't look like it could hold a siege for 20 days. But you've got to remember that on the outside, they didn't have any more armament than they had on the inside. The fort was very well built, as you can see here. It could withstand the small cannonball of those days and the musket fire and the tomahawks and the knives that were thrown at it. It was very well situated. It's on a height, and it's really odd to come into a city the size of Rome and find right in the middle of it one of the most beautiful restorations I think I have ever seen of a fort. They can be very well proud of their restored Fort Stanwix in the city of Rome, and especially now in our bicentennial year. It wasn't too long a trip at all by boat to Rome, to Fort Stanwix. All right, from here it was just a small trip over to the Erie Canal village, where here we see and we hear a narrow gauge steam train. There beside the steam train, you see the Erie Canal. Now you must remember there were 3 canals built. This is the second one, wider than the first. The first was only 5 foot across. And here is a restoration of the 1840 packet boat. One very much like DeWitt Clinton first came up from Albany to Rome when the canal was first opened. The packet boat was the queen liner of the Erie Canal. It took precedence over everything else on the canal, the barges, the commercial lines, because it was drawn by horses. Not as you see here, there were no carts with the horses. The driver either walked behind the horse or he rode the horse. And inside this packet boat, there was everything that you could need, if you weren't too fussy. They slept here at night, and then the beds went down on the side of the wall in the daytime, and the tables were set up in the daytime, and they had their meals here. This is the Independence. And as you look on top, now you get a real good view of how cramped it must have been, because they carried 40 people, believe it or not. The only place you could get a breath of air, and I guess you must have prayed for good weather, was on the top. As you can see here, the people are sitting on top, very much like they might have on their way from Albany to Syracuse to Buffalo and on west on the packet boats on the Erie Canal. This is the original Erie Canal. Can you imagine? 5 feet across, and the fullest depth was 4 foot. Here's one of the 5 forts along with Fort Stanwix, Fort Bull, and they were all built during the French and Indian Wars to protect the fur trade. And I'll tell you why that was so very important and why Rome was so very important when we get back on the canal. But right now in the Erie Canal village, from Marcy, New York, this lovely little church. Now all of the buildings in the Erie Canal village are authentic. They've been brought from near and far. And this church is a perfect example of the great restoration they are doing. The Erie Canal Village is Rome's own. It's been bonded by the people of Rome. The people of Rome have come together to move buildings, to put them together again. Carpenters working, people that were blacksmiths when we were there, building a beautiful blacksmith shop that they were moving from someplace right now where I forget. All right, just a little bit away and we're at Oriskany. And this is the battle that really and truly saved Fort Stanwix. General Nicholas Herkimer moved out of Little Falls, and on August the 6th in 1777, he arrived at this spot with 800 militia, men and boys. But Molly Brant, who was the mistress of Sir William Johnson, knew of the move and warned her brother, Joseph Brant. He and 1,000 Indians and Sir John Johnson, son of William, and 133 Royal Greens ambushed Herkimer here. The battle was fierce. It was terrible. But even though 500 of the militia died, they took enough of the Indians and the English to sort of break the spirit the Indians had for fighting. They deserted St. Ledger at Fort Stanwix. They went back into Canada. And here is the monument that really and truly signifies a great turn in the battle of the American Revolution. Down here under this tree is where General Nicholas Herkimer was carried after he received a very bad leg wound. He, however, continued to direct his troops. He was carried from here to his home in Herkimer Estates in Little Falls, and we're going to be on our way right now to the Herkimer Estates in Little Falls on the Erie Canal. Let me tell you a little bit about General Nicholas Herkimer. He was quite a man. He was second generation, believe it or not, here from Germany in this country, and in 1760 his father gave him a strip of land along the old Erie Canal. He prospered very well because it was a trading point there between the Hudson River and Oswego, and it was where the carryover was, and everybody really had to go through and pick up their supplies there. He rebuilt his home, and we'll see it's a gorgeous home in just a little while, in 1764. And it, as I said before, was the only break that the Mohawk River made in the Appalachians so you could get through. So you can see why the English protected it so well in the French and Indian Wars, and why we protected it so well against the English in the American Revolution. Gothic cottages dot the Erie Canal. And here again is a lock. Let's pause and you watch all that happens. First a lock tender. You have to beep 3 times so he knows you're there and he'll open the lock and let you in. And then it closes. Now remember I told you, remember the other one we went into? We were being lifted up. Now we're going to be dropped down because we're past Rome and the canal is running towards the Hudson. So down you go from Rome down, and I guess the call is up you go from Rome on up. Tying your boat secure is very important, because when that water rushes in and it all comes from the bottom, it really bounces your boat around quite a bit. And if you're not secure, and if you don't have your bumpers on the right side, you could scratch a nice boat up very badly. Look at the age of those locks. And remember, this is the 3rd lock. Not the 3rd lock, I'm sorry. This is the 3rd canal. This is the barge canal. 5-foot canal, and the Erie Canal. You do see some of the 2nd canal, but you see very, very little, indeed, of the 1st canal. You also will realize that it takes a lot of attending, let's say, to keep a canal. Now that's the Mohawk River there coming in, because we're coming in close to Little Falls, and that's where, just above Little Falls, the Mohawk joins the Barge Canal, and then we lose it. It goes off on its own again. In the old days, it was an intricate part of the Erie Canal. You feel very small, and you feel very insignificant in one of these canals. And when the door is open and out you go, it's a wonderful feeling. Old bridges, I guess that's why they had that great song, Burl Ives, Low Bridge, Everybody Down. The roads still went over. And children waving at us from every bridge, I think, that we went under. Now, these big gates, that one you just saw, I didn't know till I made my trip. See it there behind you? Or where they can close down, because parts of the canal in the wintertime are let dry. Of course, where there are natural rivers and that, the water flows. This is one of the excursion boats that you can take, if you care to, and make a trip all the way down and come back by Amtrak. It's a big one. One of the things about the locks is where you meet people. You take pictures. You learn about what the other boaters are doing and where they're going and where they're from. We met people from the Grand Bahamas, Ohio, Miami. You meet them all in the locks. All right, now we're coming into Little Falls. And Little Falls is famous for Herkimer Estates as far as our trip goes. It's also famous for the once upon a time tallest lift lock in the world. And it's a very pretty little town. When we're going out, we'll be able to show you the burning rocks. It wasn't too far a trip from the canal to Herkimer Estates, and I think I told you earlier, but I'll repeat it now, that this beautiful home you see is the one that General Herkimer rebuilt from his original homestead, and he rebuilt this in 1764. General Herkimer, at this point, gathered his militia to take them up to Oriskany, where we saw the battle monument and we saw where General Herkimer was wounded. This is the front of the house, believe it or not. What you saw before was the back of the house. And the road ran down in front, and of course here is where they did their soap making. They also made all of their maple syrup here. But you know, General Herkimer died in 1777, and he was buried right on his own estate. The burial grounds are still there, and they are really quite magnificent. The big granite monument you see there was not put in until 1896, when New York State put the monument up in honor of General Herkimer. And the stone that you see here wasn't put in until 1847, and it was a grandnephew of General Herkimer that marked his grave. All the stones you see in the background are all members of the Herkimer family. One of the last to be buried that I could find there was a burial in 1939, but I imagine if you were related to the Herkimer family, you could be buried here with Herkimer. Just a little way from Herkimer House is Indian Castle, with one of the loveliest old churches I've ever seen. This church was built by Sir William Johnson, and it was built for Joseph Brant and his Indians who had become Christian. It was built in 1769. It was dedicated in 1770 by a Reverend Harry Monroe. Now there's a name that's very familiar to us in upstate New York. He was from St. Peter's Church in Albany. It was here that Joseph Brant took the St. James Bible and he translated into the Mohawk language. The church is not in use now, except as a historical site. It was used by several other denominations after the Indians no longer used it, but it's the only church of a great many that were built for Indians still standing. Well, off we go again, and now we're on the thing I truly wanted to see, I think most of all on my trip. I had heard so much about the Great Lock at Little Falls, and I wasn't in the least disappointed. Now, these are the burning rocks, as they're called, that you see all along as you come into the Great Lock. And they do look like rocks that have been burned. They're black and red, and we were saying there must be a lot of iron ore in them. This was the biggest of the barges we've seen, but we were early in the season, and I understand a great many big barges like this go through. As you can see, this is being pushed by a tug. It is huge. It took so long to pass us that you have a feeling of how big it is. And also, when we talked to the lock tender, he wasn't quite sure if it was going to make it quite in the lock, but I had a feeling they knew it would. Here we come in now, and as you see, we're coming in high. You look like you could come right off the top of that. But you're not going to. What's going to happen to you, that's going to close all up, and you're going to be dropped down so that you go out the other side. The reason for that big piece of concrete up there we found in talking to the lock tender is that some big barge backed into the iron and it didn't hold, and they almost had themselves a time. Well, here we are, all set. I think we were 3 boats at this time. Yes, there's the 2, and we're behind because we're taking pictures. Look how we've dropped. And it's only just a matter of a couple of minutes. It happened so fast. In other words, in the other locks, the water was pouring in from the bottom and lifting us up. In this lock, the water is rushing out from the bottom. And you can see where it's rushed out when those gates open. It's full of tree limbs and it's full of leaves, and there's quite a swirl, and you have to be very, very careful that when you come out that you swing out. There we go. See that go up? Now we're down onto the bottom. It's a shame they built the Eisenhower lock taller than that, because for a great many years it was the tallest lift lock in the United States. All right, we've made our trip. We are ready to turn around and come home again. We left Sylvan Beach at about 12 o'clock on Friday afternoon. We're going to show you a map that'll give you a little bit of an idea. And one of these maps can be yours very easily just by writing to the New York State Department of Commerce. Here we are, Sylvan Beach, with our flag. And from Sylvan Beach, we're going to trug along, and our first lock, our first experience, as you will see here very soon, was Lock 22. Barges, the sights you see on the canal are just unbelievable. And we follow along, and we're coming into Rome again. Rome is a very strategic city. I'd like to tell you why exactly. It was located on a portage that divides the Mohawk River from Woods Creek, which flows west into the Great Lakes. And this was the only, at that time, before the war, British all-water transportation route from the Atlantic to the Great Lakes. That's why Fort Stanwix became so important. The English had been there before. They had fought the French and English War, and they knew this was a crucial fort. Did you know this was the only American fort that the British never captured? Did you know this was the only American fort that ever took the British colors? Fort Stanwix has a lot going for it, plus the fact that it's the first place that the American flag flew. Erie Canal Village, I highly recommend it if there are youngsters aboard the boat. The train ride takes about a half an hour. The boat ride takes about 3/4 of an hour. There's a museum of carriages, and here, of course, Oriskany. You know, you look at the diorama here and then go over and look down into the gully, and you'll see redskins behind every tree, and you'll hear Indians, and you'll almost see the tomahawks. On now, and this is quite a long run, as you can see, that we took from there down to Little Falls. I loved the kids on the bridges, and they liked us too. It's a feeling of absolute peace being on the canal. See the Mohawk River running along beside us there? Here's where it joins, right there, where you saw the flag in the map. And the Mohawk River is really what DeWitt Clinton needed to fill the canal, the little canal. The Mohawk River could fill all of it. Little Falls we're at now, Herkimer Estates. At one time, the old canal ran right past the beautiful Herkimer estate. The portages went by. Herkimer made his great wealth and selling supplies. The Indian church. It's hard to see this church and remember Oriskany. Well, here we are on our way back. Tired a little bit, yes. but really not as tired as it would have been by car. Peaceful, beautiful. The wild birds I saw, I'll never forget. I have never seen so many wildflowers. I was introduced to water iris, and it grew plentiful along the banks. If you have a boat and you want to relive part of our history, our nation's past and now its present on the Erie Canal, get your family together and make sure you have everything aboard that you'll need, as there are not too many stores around. But there is transportation from where you dock to where you'd like to go. So there's nothing in the world, as far as I'm concerned, like a bicentennial weekend on the Erie Canal, from Sylvan Beach to Little Falls and back. From 12 noon on Friday, done very easily. We were back in Sylvan Beach at 7:30 in the evening.
It's many miles to Buffalo. Oh, that's no bridge. The boggy mule, he travels slow. Oh, that's no bridge. There's gravel on the towpath. There's hornets in the sand. Oh, pity poor canalers far away from land. Then look out at Low Bridge. Look out at Low Bridge. The captain, cook, and all the crew. Oh, duck your head way down. The fastest boat in all the fleet to Syracuse from the town. There's many like to shut you in. Oh, that's Low Bridge. Every